There are many roads to becoming our true self, and one of those roads that's been tried and tested for hundreds of years is that of integral yoga. To discover more, teacher Ben Carver is with me. Ben, welcome.
Thank you.
So, authenticity is so essential for our well-being. When was it first discovered?
Well, first of all, should we just talk about what authenticity really means?
Yes, please.
So if we think about the word, we think it means to be truthful, to be honest, have integrity, to be true to oneself. Now, that also opens up another question is, what is the self? Because in the West and the East, we have very different ideas about what that means. Western society generally is about how great you can be as an individual, what you can achieve as an individual. So we could call that, in some ways, the full self, the ego, individuality. Whereas in the East, the whole culture, the whole society was built around how great you can be in God, by transcending the ego, by finding your strength in the collective consciousness. So they're completely different impulses, if you like. So then what is well-being? So well-being, I know it's a buzzword these days, but it's not just a bit of physical good feeling. We could say that it's really what's born out of coherence, when our mind, body and soul are all in harmony, in balance, functioning together, in alignment, you could say. And that sense of inner alignment that comes from that, this is what then feeds into a far deeper sense of well-being. So the authenticity, being true to your true self, the Eastern version of the self, and this giving rise to well-being. So when was this discovered? That brings up the question in my mind, or the idea that you can think of life as being a process of forgetting and then remembering, where we come from somewhere, we lose awareness of that, and then we have to, through our own ingenuity, rediscover that truth or that reality. So, because most of us, we tend to be aware of and be considerate about the things and the people around us. We're not all carrying the whole world with us in our consciousness. So the things which are close by, we hold with us. So you think about even physically, the body that you are born into. This has been created, nourished and grown in your mother's body, and then it kind of separates out. So initially you have that feeling you're very much part of your mother or your parents in general, and then you grow in your individuality. And sometimes, if there's quite a gravitational pull around that unit, sometimes you have to push away a little bit, but then you establish yourself, your own individuality, and then you can rediscover that connection that you have with them later in life. But then, if you think about our self-awareness, our consciousness, our soul, what is it that's nurturing and originating that, and what is it that we are separating out of to find ourselves and then rediscover? So you can think of that as the body, the ocean of consciousness, the divine, God, whatever you want to call it, that we are born out of that. We feel very familiar with it in the beginning, so that's why young children have that kind of innate wisdom and happiness and truth about them, authenticity, we could say. But then as you grow, you push away from that, you discover your desires, your instincts. Of course, particularly through puberty, there's a big cutting off process that takes place then. And then, depending on how far you fall down that hole, you have to spend a significant amount of your life repairing the mistakes that you make in that process, or re-establishing the connections that you've lost, and rediscovering that truth under your own steam. And life teaches us that sometimes in quite confronting ways, or we read a book and we decide to consciously rediscover that connection. But it's always part of that process of forgetting and remembering. And you also see that on the scale of a race, a society. As a race, we were very close to the Creator when we first arrived. We lost that connection, particularly as we've developed more and more intellect, and we've cultivated societies, and because the things which hold us together as a society, they are often at the expense of our authenticity to ourselves. So that there's a forgetting process there, a kind of an ignorance which gets instilled, and then we have to try and remember. But sometimes teachings come along, and this is really where yoga and spirituality and even religion later on. Yoga, the meaning is to unite or union. Religion means to reconnect. These teachings arrived, and these teachers arrived in order to help humanity reconnect and remember, rediscover that authentic connection.
It's a very interesting area of discussion, and one that more and more people seem to be getting interested in. There's a lot of magazine articles and self-help books. Is it something that you can do on your own? Because it does seem so complex, having to separate the ego, perhaps parts of you that have been quite effective in your life. And I'm doing pretty well here. Have I really got to let go of that? And it may be that you actually are lost. The ego has become so much a part of you that you are lost, and it takes a lot of time to reconnect. So is it something that you can do on your own?
In theory, yes, but of course, as you just said, there are many, many pitfalls on that journey. Especially, because if in this Western approach, we do create a very strong false self, an ego structure. And if that's all that you know about yourself, if you've never really looked deeper into your nature, then to lose that, of course, is going to feel like you're dying. It's they talk about the ego death, don't they? And so that can be incredibly challenging for people. It feels like they're falling into the abyss, But this is really why it's very important to have some kind of guidance through this process, because that false self is built on only a partial understanding of who we are. And when we're talking in terms of absolute truths, a partial understanding is basically a wrong understanding. So a wrong understanding is born out of ignorance. And if you're using your ignorance to try and solve your ignorance, of course, that's a vicious circle that is going to be very difficult to get out of.
And by ignorance, you mean lack of information?
Yeah, lack of information, lack of understanding, lack of knowledge about who we truly are and what our true relationship is with each other, with the universe, with life, and so on. So that's why in spiritual traditions they say it's really important to find a teacher or a set of teachings and then to rigorously test them out. They even talk about spending 12 years investigating a teacher before you commit yourself to them, because you're giving your life to them, really, in some ways. You're using them as a savior, to bring you back to your truth, yourself. So it really is a life and death situation if you put it in its true context. So yes, check out your teacher. But then when you do decide that they are genuine and they really know what they're talking about, give them everything, I know that's difficult to hear in modern society because, we like to think that we are the ones in control of everything. We should never make ourselves vulnerable to manipulation by another person. But I suppose you have to try and just feel and follow your intuition, follow the signs, as it were, in life as to where you should be going, what you should be following.
So there's a need to surrender to the information in order to let go of partial information, of ignorance. Is that right?
Yes, and there will always be a process of shedding, of taking away, removing layers, and just like peeling onions, you take a layer off and it sometimes is a bit tearful, but maybe they're tears of joy as well. You're discovering a greater reality inside yourself. So there'll always be an element of that, yes.
So the idea is to let go of something that you currently value because there may be something even more valuable.
Yes, absolutely. And of course, if you've only experienced a certain level of fulfillment or satisfaction or happiness, you think that's everything. And if you haven't really experienced a much deeper, more fulfilling, beautiful, ecstatic even happiness, then how would you even think about letting go of the happiness that you already have? So that's why you need to have these things explained to you, or maybe sometimes we get intuitive glimpses of these possibilities. And sometimes it's nice to have this analogy of a mountain. You know, if life, the mission of life is to scale this mountain, because on the mountain there's beautiful fresh air, fresh food, fresh water. But of course, people will find where that water gravitates down to in the valley, and they'll start to gather there and build a society and a town and a way of living down there. And if enough people gather there, then I suppose the pollution of the unhealthy ways we live, think and feel start to build up, and it would develop a kind of a mist, a smog over the town. So you might not even know that there's a mountain there to discover, until someone whispers, I found this old book, or this old guy, he was crazy, but he was telling me about this mountain, and I'd never heard of it, So, but then, most people will ignore that because it is crazy. But the odd person, it touches something inside that, those rare people that know that there must be something more to life, or they've had a glimpse through the clouds at some point. And so they set off. But again, you don't know the mountain, you don't know the way up. You might, walk over a cliff, or all kinds of accidents can befall you. So you look for a guide that knows their way. Now the problem is, there are all kinds of people that have gone a little way up that mountain, and they've found maybe a beautiful meadow or a glade or a valley, and they think, this is it, this was where we were trying to get to. And of course, maybe they've also never seen the summit. Often when you're climbing in the mountains, the lower peaks, they obscure the main peak, or there's just clouds or whatever it is. So people think they've discovered something very beautiful, and they come back down saying, I've discovered this amazing thing, you come with me, And they probably think, I'm sure no one's ever gone this way before, I'm going to name it after me,
Yeah.
So this is John's route,
Yes.
or whatever. So you got these, these different brands of spirituality coming about. But
and then you've got the ego coming in, of course.
Yeah, because they think that, this is mine, and so there's a lot of ego involved in those things as well, and also partial knowledge, partial understanding.
Mm-hmm. Partial way up the mountain.
Yeah, but the idea is you want to find someone that has scaled the entire mountain, that's got to the very top, because from there, and only from there, can you see and therefore understand all of the different routes to get there. So a person that really has conquered the mountain and knows the mountain fully, they can breathe understanding into all the different routes. In other words, you can think of all the different spiritual traditions, religions that exist in the world, where partial understanding will lead to all kinds of problems and conflicts. But you do get these rare people that can breathe the genuine meaning into all of those spiritual traditions, to find the essence of them, which may have been somewhat lost along the way. Yeah.
Amazing. What about your own journey scaling the mountain? How did you discover your true self, and have you had a lot of light bulb moments?
I'd say it's maybe more of a gradual awakening. I remember when I left school, and you have to make your first decisions in life about higher education and things like this. And I started to wonder, why am I making the choices I'm making? Am I just doing what everybody else is doing? Or am I just fulfilling other people's expectations, family, friends, parents, these kind of things? And then I started to wonder, where do my thoughts originate from? The thoughts that I'm having about these decisions, where do they come from? And am I just repeating thoughts that I've been told or heard from other places, or conditioned to think by society? And I started to wonder, am I even capable of having an original thought? Can I actually be creative? And it wasn't for 7 more years, maybe 10 years later, I had a chance to actually do something about this. And that's when I had a chance to fulfill something that had been growing inside me, the desire to make my life a bit more meaningful, to give it more of a spiritual base, and quite possibly to teach something as well. That had always been there in the background as well. Yeah.
And what about your light bulb moments? Can you recall any?
Well, there was a moment where maybe it wasn't so much the light bulb coming on in me, but the light in the room coming on. There was a moment when I was about 28. Everything I was doing in my life, job, relationship, musical things I was doing, they all suddenly vanished. And so I had a moment of, it's quite intimidating, quite scary to begin with, but then it gave me the chance to actually do all the things that I'd been wanting to do for a long time. And it's like a building pressure inside my mind, inside my being, which had been growing for a while. So I got a chance. I had a very, how can we say, inspirational time for a few months, just following the muse, as it were. And I got a chance to go to India, which is something I've been wanting to do for a while. It's my mother's homeland. I'm half Indian, but not necessarily for that. It was more about discovering where spirituality came from. And so I ended up traveling out there, spending a year and a half out there. Had all these romantic ideas about how I was going to sit in front of an ashram until the guru accepted me and all this kind of thing. But it took quite a different route. But yeah, that was where I discovered many things, but also this form of integral yoga that we're talking about.
How many years ago was that?
25 years ago now.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what impact did it have? Was it immediate?
Again, over that year and a half in India, it was a bit gradual. I spent time in ashrams, in monasteries, studying Buddhism, studying yoga, different types of yoga.
Comparing the different routes up the mountain.
Yeah, exactly. But what I found a lot was that there are a lot of people who were apparently doing the same kind of thing as me. I felt like they were more, what do you say, spiritual tourists. That they were trying a bit of everything, a bit like a tasting menu, but never really pursuing it and progressing with it in a meaningful way. And it was a bit like when you have a difficult relationship and you break up, and then you break up and then you go looking for a different relationship, and you start over, and before long you find yourself facing exactly the same problems which led to the breakup of the first one. So I saw this happening with people who were breaking up from their life, their culture, leaving things behind in their own culture, coming to India, trying out a new culture to see if it felt better. And of course, running into the same problems that they faced in the original situation. So they're still very much carrying their baggage with them. But I actually remember hearing about the Dalai Lama telling people sometimes that, rather than coming here and trying to learn Buddhism, why not persevere with your own cultural religion? Because that's where you grow up. Your whole development was done in that environment, so it might well be a much more natural expression of your true nature. And I have to say that in India, and particularly through learning about integral yoga, it gave me the understanding to heal my relationship with Christianity. I was raised, not particularly in the family, but at school I was raised in a Catholic environment. In, I must say, that kind of patronising, slightly hypocritical way that it often is taught by adults to children, which of course the children in their great wisdom immediately see through and distrust, and I was one of those kind of kids. So I wasn't looking for Jesus or God or anything like that. I was looking for something I considered more real. But being in India and hearing yogis there talking about God and even talking about Jesus, and it's another little side window, but the whole idea of Jesus having travelled the Silk Route and being in India and maybe in Tibet and Nepal and these places and exchanging ideas with these teachers. So seeing that religion from that point of view and the understandings, the principles, the mechanisms and so on, which integral yoga equipped me with to understand these things, it really healed my relationship with my religion. Yeah.
So there was like a harmonious feeling inside you, whereas previously there'd been conflict.
Yes. Yeah. There was a lot of resolution. Because conflict is when we have a partial view which opposes someone else's partial view, and understanding these fundamental principles the way it's taught, it broadens your view. You can think of spiritual growth as learning to contain ever greater paradoxes. You know, because the ultimate truth, the absolute truth, doesn't have any paradox anymore. There's no opposing view. There just is that truth. You know, so that contains all of the lesser truths. So yeah, in that way, it healed that conflict. Yeah.
And talk to me about the principles. Was that something? Had you led your life up until that point with certain principles, or was this a new idea to have some fundamental principles to base your life around and your spiritual life?
Yeah. Well, having not really grown up in a religious background, or it wasn't particularly strongly instilled in me, although I have to say, given my family and my parents credit, they were very upright, you know, honest people with integrity, these kind of things. So there were values, definitely, but just not, you know, laid down in law in that way. So I tried to lead my life the best I could, but then, of course, without the whole picture, you don't really have a great way of finding reference points in life. You know, okay, I need to be good, but how good? You know, how much is good enough? You know, these kind of things. What does goodness really mean? You know, is it just what's good for me, or good for you, or good for everyone? You know? So it's not really until you understand these things on a universal scale, it gives you that, you know, that broadest perspective to understand all of the, you know, all human emotions and values and meaning and these kind of things, which gives a context to everything that you're experiencing in life, because otherwise life can seem just chaotic and crazy and confusing and, you know, lacking meaning.
And the idea of nurturing certain qualities. You know, in my everyday life, people didn't talk about gratitude and generosity. People were kind and they were pleasant, but no one ever said to me, Vivian, why are you not nurturing your gratitude? You know.
Yeah.
So these kinds of principles are extremely useful, and they're all part of integral yoga.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a bit more about the specifics of integral yoga, the practices and so on?
Well, like any meaningful spiritual tradition, you know, the idea is to discover your true self. And as we said right at the beginning, that is something that we're really just remembering. We're unearthing from all of the other things going on in our mind, our emotions and body. So integral yoga, it begins with these principles, you know, the fundamental principles known as the yamas and niyamas, the morals and the ethics that we should guide our life by. And these are really, really important, because as you do start to harmonize and purify and strengthen your body, your being, you can consider that you become somewhat more powerful. And of course, with power comes temptation, you know, we've all seen the movies. But it's very important that you get your alignment, get your direction established first, you know, with these values, with these principles, you know, to be honest, to be non-violent and these kind of things. So that when you do start to accumulate a bit more energy, a bit more power, as we could say, it doesn't go in unhealthy directions.
So you're already starting to establish the answer to the questions, who am I and what's my purpose in life, so that you have some direction.
Yeah. So then, you know, you have the physical practices, the yoga postures, which purify and harmonize the physical body. You also help then to balance the emotions, the energies that you're experiencing, and the way you experience them. You consciously decide to step away from negative emotions and feelings because you recognize that they're actually completely unhelpful in life. And also put your emotional investment in what you're doing, you know, to really believe in the efficiency of what you're doing. And so put your whole being into it and love what you're doing, you know, these kind of ideas. Purifying the minds, learning to focus the minds. And this is all part of the will, you know, you decide to do something, you decide to do that physical practice, and then you do it. You decide to focus your feelings and your mind in what you're doing. You learn to focus in specific locations in the body to establish very precise resonance processes as you're doing these postures or techniques. So it's all very deliberate. As I said, life can sometimes feel very confusing and lacking meaning or deliberateness.
And lacking structure.
Yeah, structure, but this really puts structure into everything that you're doing spiritually, but also into everything that you experience in the rest of your life. So the whole life becomes a spiritual practice in that way when you fully engage these things that we're learning.
So understanding your real self, that's at the heart of it, is that right? As opposed to just a byproduct of attending the classes and doing the asanas and...
Yes, absolutely. As I just said, any genuine spiritual tradition, that is always the ultimate aim, to know oneself. And through that, therefore, to get to know the absolute reality. Because essentially, they are one and the same. We came from that, we are a part of that. And again, it's remembering this and stepping back into that wholeness. And the sense of worthiness and feeling worthwhile, feeling good about oneself, this is really born out of that, because unless we understand the meaning of our life a bit better, where did I come from, where am I going, who am I, what is the point of all this, without the context of the larger picture, you can't really find those answers. And also without awakening the eyes of your heart, you can't hope to discover those answers in your life or in the world around you. Because it's only through understanding these things and understanding your place in the universe, your relationship with the universe, that that real fulfilling sense of worth comes.
So you have an expanded sense of self-worth, and presumably then that's like that feeds back in to that, what you describe as a kind of energetic structure, mind, body, spirit, all connected, and you're powering up your self-worth, powering everything up, really, through integral yoga. Yeah. Well, it sounds amazing.
It is.
So what do we need to leave behind? I mean, you talked a little bit about dismantling the ego. Do we have to kind of step into a kind of wilderness where we strip everything away?
That is an option. I mean, that would be the ascetic route. If everything that we're experiencing in life, its energies, its passions, desires and so on, are distracting us from knowing the absolute, then throw it all away, get rid of it. It's a distraction. That is one route. But of course, in the modern world, in modern life, most people would not tend to choose that. We still want to live our lives and enjoy life. So fortunately, integral yoga, being essentially a tantric approach to life, which is the opposite of the ascetic. So rather than throw everything away, we learn to use everything fully and properly, and so we harmonize and strengthen the body. We awaken the energies that we experience fully, but also learn how to handle them and control them properly. So we can always harness that to develop a really powerful vehicle or instrument through which we can pursue this spiritual path.
And to use the material of everyday life as kind of grit in the oyster to create the pearls, is that right?
Yeah, because sometimes it is like that. The grit in the oyster, or the chickpeas in the pressure cooker. We need pressure, we need abrasion to form us, to shape us. For the piece of coal to be compressed into a diamond. That quality, that beauty, that purity does exist in us, but it needs refining. So you have a choice. Do you stumble through life and bang your head every 5 minutes and suffer and think, oh, why me? Oh, maybe I should do this a bit differently next time, and then forget and make the same mistakes over and over? Or do you decide to make it a bit more of a conscious process? Read some books, learn, and try to avoid those same mistakes, and even avoid making them at all if you have already understood why they might need to come into your life. So you can use everything in life, and we really should, because if everything is connected, then everything in life has meaning. And if the universe has a certain wisdom, a consciousness to it, then there's also the idea that, you know, we're only shown the experiences that we need to actually learn through. So
to embrace every experience.
Yes.
No matter how uncomfortable it is.
Yes, and to say, good. Something positive will come out of this. I just need to fully live it and to understand it, digest it.
There is a bit of a culture of moaning, I would say, these days. People just not happy with their lives, they're kind of constantly critical and not accepting of their lot. Do you find that with a lot of new students when they come to integral yoga, that it's quite a shock for them to see that, oh, you know, I actually am a bit judgmental, I'm a bit moany here?
I mean, yeah, we all come with a bit of that, don't we? But hopefully the process is gradual enough that it doesn't come as a massively confronting shock. You know, they don't walk in the door and you hold up a massive mirror and say, "Look at you, you're terrible." You know, it's a gradual process of, you know, as you said, removing the layers, seeing yourself in a more genuine way gradually. Because if we're confronted, we just get traumatized, don't we? And we actually push away the thing that we're aiming to find.
So you're welcoming truth seekers?
Absolutely, yes.
I suppose it's a bit of a difficult question, really, but why is the truth so difficult to find?
It's well hidden, isn't it? It's difficult to find because often the idea of ourselves that we've created and that we believe so strongly in, we identify completely with, in a way obscures that truth. And so we build like a defensive wall around it. So in order to find that, yeah, we have to embrace a little bit of discomfort, you know, because life, again, that picture of ourselves that we create is a quite a fixed picture. You know, we think that is me, you know, and I will be me in 10 years' time. Nothing's really going to change. But when you really start to understand the nature of life, with that comes understanding that life is constantly changing. Evolution is a continuous process, and we are also continually growing and changing. But the more you hold on to a fixed version of yourself, you know, it's like you're fighting against a river. You're grasping onto a rock somewhere, and that river's getting stronger and stronger and stronger until it will, you know, rip your hands away to some extent. So if we embrace that change and even learn to love it, it can be a very beautiful thing because you're discovering more and more of yourself. But if we're holding on to the old version, that's when it gets difficult because that change is coming whether we like it or not. And it's just whether we experience it in a very terrible, suffering way or we embrace it. Yeah.
Ben, is there any risk in becoming too powerful?
Of course. You know, we spoke about how integral yoga can be very empowering. You know, you're harnessing the energies and power of the body and being. So of course that can lead you into becoming very proud about your practice. So, you know, this is another of the pitfalls. You know, if you're practicing because you're proud of how good you are, or you're doing it for show, or you're doing it out of competition with your fellow students, or even competition with yourself. But also if you feel like you have to limit how other people behave around you while you're practicing, you know, all these kind of things, they're all expressions of ego. And spiritual ego is a major pitfall because, you know, people get into spirituality and think, okay, I'm moving away from the old version of myself, but I'm also moving away from everyone else who used to be like that as well. You know, so there can come a feeling of superiority very easily from that. But all of these things, they are all ego. And because the ego is a very slippery creature, and the further we get along these paths, the ego will try even harder to somehow seduce us in this way. So that's why it's very, very important, you know, in the practice to, you know, you do your postures, you do your techniques, you do your meditations, but always with an attitude of being a detached observer. So it's not me, you're not in this way, you're not enjoying the benefits yourself. The aim would be to be practicing as a channel, to watch this process of your becoming increasingly integrated in the whole as a witness, you know. And this is really the safety mechanism, to make sure that everything you're doing is increasing your integration in the whole, rather than increasing your sense of separation, individuality, and me getting more awakened, more powerful.
So you're integrating the knowledge, the experience, how to do the practices and various other techniques. You're integrating it into the whole of yourself, but also the whole of the universe.
I mean, everything you're doing, you know, if spiritual growth means moving from individuality and fear towards connectivity, oneness and love, then everything you're doing in your spiritual practice should be taking you closer to that goal of becoming completely united with everything and everyone. So anything which creates greater separation, you know, like, oh, I'm better than them, or, you know, I'm better than I was yesterday even, you know, that's still a separation. Or don't do that, you know, I'm practicing, you know, it's all separation. So whatever, and again, in this path of embracing life, everything which is going on around you, everything you're aware of, is part of your consciousness, and therefore a reflection of you. So again, it's a very useful trick sometimes. You know, maybe you're meditating, there's distracting noise, but you have to recognize that that is a distraction coming from inside you, and embrace it and love it. You know, so rather than pushing away things which are difficult, to embrace and love them, bring them in. It's all about healing relationships until all the disparate parts of ourselves and the disparate parts of the whole universe from the bigger picture become one. So healing, uniting, reconnecting.
And not thinking of ourselves as a single unit, which has got to improve and impress and succeed. I suppose it's the survival mechanism that we have to keep us alive.
Yeah, or the ambition, or the pride, you know, all these kind of things. But yeah, that's the first thing you need to let go of, really, if you're going to make any meaningful progress. And sometimes it happens immediately. Sometimes it takes years. You know, it took me a while, I have to be honest, to recognise that the way I was practicing was not necessarily the most helpful and beneficial. So you have to, you know, let go of all of that pride about how good you feel doing these things, how well you can do them, and just start from where you truly are. You know, it always comes back to honesty and authenticity, as we're saying. Because unless you're starting from an authentic point, you have no frame of reference for where you're going or the direction you're taking or anything. You know, it's like having a map, but being in a foggy environment, you have no idea how to use that map.
And you were saying before that you were talking to yourself and you were wondering, well, where are these thoughts coming from? So presumably when you're being objective and being the witness to yourself and being a channel, you have now changed the conversation that you're having with yourself, the internal voice, the thoughts.
Yeah. And recognise that we have you know, a few different internal voices. You know, the mind, which will be telling us one thing, you know, based on society's norms and survival instincts and needs and desires, all these kind of things, ambitions, worldly things, in other words. And then the inner voice, which is often a bit quieter. You need to listen a bit more closely to hear it. But then, you know, recognising that everything that's happening inside of us, it's originating from somewhere. And I suppose if you get to know anything well enough, you'll find its source, and that source will always take us back towards, you know, the origin of everything. So, and that's why all routes are valid in a way, but just some are just easier and more beneficial and safer than others. So, yeah.
I would imagine you'd have to learn to be quite vigilant and have very good focus in order to be a witness to yourself.
Yes, and that is a big part of the training.
Will you have techniques for training the focus?
Absolutely, yes. Concentration is one of the primary things that you learn Because without that, you don't have any control over anything that's happening in your mind, your body, or in your life. So, yeah.
And it's so addictive to being scattered and scatty and doing millions of things at once. This is the society that we live in now that's become more and more fragmented.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, focus is very important. It doesn't mean you can't connect into, amazing sources of creativity and have wonderful inspirations, but it's just being a bit more selective about them.
And being more in charge, actually.
Yeah.
So when you're in touch with your true self, then can you be more in charge of your life?
Absolutely, because if that true self is a fragment, a drop of the ocean of the absolute, which is kind of by definition in charge of everything, that process of knowing yourself is a process of acknowledging, yes, I am part of this, and yes, I also have a creative role to play. So you become like a co-creator in your own life, which is a wonderful place to be.
It certainly is, yes. Ben, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching. At Tara, our mission is to make genuine spiritual knowledge available for all those who aspire for spiritual development and transformation. If you enjoyed this discussion, please like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel.